If you've been building software for more than 3 years, there's a good chance you've had this moment. You're staring at a Claude or ChatGPT output, and it just wrote the thing you would have spent 4 hours writing. And instead of feeling excited, you feel this weird, quiet dread. Like something got taken from you that you didn't even know you were holding on to. My friend Marcus shipped his first SaaS in 2019. Wrote every single line himself. Stayed up until 3 in the morning debugging auth flows he barely understood, and wore that as a badge of honor. Last month, he told me he hasn't written a function from scratch in 6 months. And he's making more money than ever. Here's the part that genuinely unsettled me. He said he doesn't know what to call himself anymore. That question, what do I call myself, sounds almost trivial until you realize how much of a developer's entire identity is built around the craft of writing code. It's not just a job title. It's how you introduce yourself at parties, how you justify your rate to clients, how you feel when you solve a hard problem at midnight. And now AI is quietly dismantling that foundation, and nobody's really talking about what's supposed to replace it. So that's what this is about. Not whether AI is good or bad, not whether you should use it. You probably already do. This is about what actually happens to the person holding the keyboard when the keyboard starts to matter less. Meet Marcus. He's 31, lives in Austin, and in 2019, he built a small B2B tool for freelance designers to manage client invoices. Nothing fancy, a Rails app, a Stripe integration, some basic reporting. But he built it alone, and it worked, and it made him feel like a real engineer for the first time. He'd spent 2 years before that feeling like an imposter, copying Stack Overflow answers and hoping nobody noticed. Shipping that product changed something. He started calling himself a developer without flinching. He raised his consulting rate. He took on harder projects. The code was the proof. The code was the identity. Fast forward to early 2024. Marcus starts using Cursor and Claude for side projects. At first it feels like cheating. He'd prompt the AI, get a working component back, feel vaguely guilty, then ship it. But the guilt fades fast when the output is actually good. By mid-2024, he's prompting first and coding second. By late 2024, he's barely coding at all. And here's the thing that surprised him. The products got better. Faster to ship, fewer bugs, more features. His revenue went up. His clients were happier. But every time someone asked him what he did for work, he'd hesitate for just a second before answering. And that hesitation started to bother him. Now here's where Marcus's story stops being just Marcus's story. Because a 2025 study by METR, that's a machine learning evaluation research group, ran a randomized controlled trial with experienced developers using early 2025 AI tools. And the result was genuinely strange. Developers using AI tools took 19% longer to complete tasks than those working without them. But, and this is the part that breaks your brain, they felt 20% faster. They felt more productive while actually being slower. And by February 2026, so many developers had integrated AI into their daily workflow that they refused to participate in studies requiring them to work without it for even half their tasks. The tool had become load-bearing. Curious, so what's actually happening here? Why would smart, experienced people feel faster while being slower, and then refuse to give up the thing that slowed them down? The answer is that AI tools don't just change how you work, they change what working feels like. The friction of writing code, the cognitive load of holding a whole system in your head, the frustration of syntax errors. AI removes all of that. And friction, it turns out, is part of how we measure effort. When the effort disappears, the work feels effortless, which the brain reads as fast, even when the clock says otherwise. That's not a bug in Marcus's perception. That's a deeply human response to a tool that changes the texture of the work itself. To understand why this identity crisis is hitting so hard right now, you have to go back to how developer identity actually formed in the first place. The indie hacker movement, the whole build in public, ship alone, make money without VC money ethos, was built on a very specific promise. If you can code, you can build anything. The code was the moat. It's why people spent years learning React and Postgres and Docker. Not just because they needed those skills, but because those skills meant something. They were the barrier to entry that separated the builders from everyone else. And that barrier held for a long time. The indie hacker community grew through the early 2020s on this foundation. People like Peter Levels, John Brojo, and hundreds of others built audiences and products around the idea that technical skill was the open up. You learned to code, you shipped a product, you were in the club. And the community reinforced this. Twitter threads about tech stacks, debates about frameworks, built-in public logs that were really just detailed accounts of someone writing code alone at night. The craft was the content. The code was the culture. And then, somewhere between GPT-4 in 2023 and Claude 3.5 in 2024, the moat started draining. Not all at once, gradually, and then suddenly, which is how all the important shifts happen. The skills that took years to develop could now be approximated in minutes by someone with a good prompt and a clear idea. The barrier didn't disappear, but it got low enough that a lot of people could step over it. And that changed everything about what it meant to be a developer, especially a solo one. Serious, here's the part that doesn't make the headlines. The demand for AI skills is growing roughly 20 times faster than the overall job market right now. AI-related skills appeared in about 2.5% of all U.S. job postings in 2026. That's a nearly 300% increase over the past decade. And workers with AI skills are commanding wage premiums up to 56% higher than those without. So on paper, this looks like a great time to be technical. But the specific technical skill that defined a generation of indie hackers, writing code, is being quietly repriced downward, while a new skill nobody has a clean name for is being priced upward. And that gap is where the identity crisis lives. So let's talk about what the system actually looks like now, because this is where it gets interesting. When Marcus builds a product today, here's roughly what happens. He describes the feature in plain English. The AI writes the first draft. He reviews it, not line by line, but architecturally. He asks questions. Does this scale? Does this introduce a security issue? Does this match the pattern I'm using elsewhere? Then he iterates with the AI, not on the code itself, but on the logic and the design. And then he ships. The code is still there. The technical judgment is still there. But the act of writing, the actual typing of syntax, that's mostly gone. What Marcus is doing now has a few names floating around. AI operator, AI orchestrator, technical product manager, prompt engineer, which honestly sounds like something you'd put on a resume when you don't know what else to write. None of them have stuck, and that's kind of the point. The role exists, it's clearly valuable, people are getting paid well to do it, and we still don't have a word for it, which is genuinely disorienting if your whole professional identity was built around a word you used to have. Marcus isn't alone in this, and the data backs that up in a way that's almost uncomfortable to read. A 2025 report found that 50 to 55% of U.S. jobs will be substantially reshaped by AI over the next 2 to 3 years. Not eliminated, reshaped. The job stays, the work changes. And researchers are specifically calling out a quiet identity crisis among people whose jobs were to be creative, which includes developers, because writing code is a creative act, even if it doesn't always feel like one. The people who designed these AI tools aren't villains. They were just solving a problem, and the side effect of that solution is that a whole professional identity is now up for renegotiation. Now, let's be fair to the other side of this argument, because there's a real one. A lot of experienced developers will tell you, and they're not wrong, that AI tools are only as good as the person directing them. That you need deep technical knowledge to catch the AI's mistakes, to understand why a suggested architecture is subtly broken, to know when the code is technically correct but practically disastrous. And that's true. The METR study found that experienced developers were actually slower with AI tools, partly because they were doing the critical review work that less experienced users skip. The craft isn't gone. It's just moved upstream. And honestly, that counterargument has some real weight. There's a difference between someone who can direct AI to build a scalable SaaS architecture and someone who just knows how to type prompts. The underlying knowledge still matters. It just expresses itself differently now. The analogy I keep coming back to is a film director versus a camera operator. A director doesn't need to know how to operate the camera, but they absolutely need to understand what the camera can and can't do, what makes a shot work, what the editor will need later. The craft knowledge is still load-bearing. It's just not visible in the final output anymore. Whispers, but here's the part that the craft still matters argument quietly glosses over. The number of people who can direct AI to build something useful without deep coding knowledge is growing fast. And the gap between what a non-technical AI operator can build versus what a technical one can build is narrowing every 6 months. Which means the premium on deep technical knowledge isn't disappearing, but it is compressing. And for someone whose professional identity was built on being one of the few people who could build things, that compression is existential, even if the bank account doesn't show it yet. Let me give you 2 more people to think about, because Marcus's story is one version of this, but it's not the only one. First, there's Priya. She's 26, taught herself to code in 2021, got her first freelance clients in 2022, and was just starting to feel confident in her skills when AI tools went mainstream. For Priya, the identity crisis hit differently. She never had the years of craft to fall back on. She'd barely finished building the identity when the ground shifted. She told me she sometimes feels like she learned to drive just as self-driving cars became standard. Technically, she can still drive. It's just not clear why that matters anymore. Then there's Daniel. He's 44, has been writing code since the 90s, and his reaction to all of this is almost the opposite of Marcus and Priya. Daniel uses AI tools, but he's not having an identity crisis at all. And when I asked him why, he said something that I've been thinking about ever since. He said, "I never called myself a coder. I called myself someone who solves problems. The tool changed. The job didn't. And look, that's either a genuinely healthy mindset or a cope so elegant it deserves its own TED Talk. I'm honestly not sure which, but it points at something real. Because here's what's actually changing, and this is the part worth sitting with. The indie hacker and solo founder world is going through a genuine renegotiation of what it means to build. For years, the answer was, you build by writing code. Now, the answer is becoming, you build by knowing what to build, why to build it, and how to direct the tools that build it. That's a different skill set. It overlaps with the old one, but it's not the same thing. And the people who are thriving right now, and there are a lot of them, are the ones who made peace with that shift without waiting for a new job title to tell them it was okay. Excited. And the opportunity here is actually kind of remarkable if you can get past the grief of the old identity long enough to see it. The demand for people who can think clearly about what to build, communicate it precisely to AI tools, evaluate the output critically, and ship fast. That demand is exploding. AI-related skills command wage premiums up to 56% higher right now. The indie hacker community is producing more successful solo founders than ever because the barrier to building a real product has dropped dramatically. The people who are winning aren't the ones who code the best. They're the ones who think the clearest. So what does Marcus call himself now? Last time I talked to him, he said he's been using product engineer, which is a real title that's been floating around Silicon Valley for a while, meaning someone who can think about product and build it, not just one or the other. It's not perfect, but it's closer. More importantly, he said he stopped needing the title to feel legitimate about the work. The work is shipping things people pay for. The work is solving problems. The code was always just the medium, not the message. It took losing the medium to figure that out, which is honestly kind of a classic way to learn anything important. Here's what this means for you specifically, and I want to be concrete about this because vague advice is just noise. If you're a developer who's been building for 3 or more years, your technical knowledge isn't worthless. It's actually your biggest advantage with AI tools, because you can catch the mistakes that non-technical operators miss. The move is to lean into that critical review role, not to pretend the tools don't exist. If you're earlier in your journey, like Priya, the honest truth is that learning to code is still worth doing. Not because you'll write every line manually, but because you need the mental model to direct AI effectively. You don't need to be a virtuoso. You need to be a competent conductor. And if you're sitting with that weird, quiet dread I described at the start, the feeling that something got taken from you, I want to say this directly. That feeling is real, and it makes sense, and you don't have to rush past it. The craft of writing code was genuinely meaningful. The late nights, the debugging sessions, the moment something finally worked, that was real. Grieving the loss of that as the primary thing is not weakness. It's just honest. But grief has a job to do, and the job is to clear space for what comes next. And what comes next, for the people paying attention, is actually pretty interesting. The one thing I'd suggest you do today, not this week, today, is go look at what you've built in the last 6 months and ask yourself honestly, how much of the value came from the code you wrote, and how much came from the decisions you made about what to build and why? Because I'd bet the answer surprises you. The decisions were always the valuable part. The code was just how you executed them. AI didn't take the valuable part. It just made the execution cheaper, which means the decisions matter even more now than they did before. That's not a consolation prize. That's actually the upgrade. If you want to go deeper on how to build your first AI-assisted product from scratch without losing your mind in the process, that's exactly what the next video covers.